Yes. So if we can have the California delegation escort the Honorable George Miller.
Okay, why doesn't the California delegation leave?
You can do that.
They're my friends.
Unless you want to fill in the seats.
They're my friends. Unless you want to sit up, as long as I have that, George has the place. All right. Last time I introduced Congressman Miller was 5 years ago. He was our legislative, Boilermaker legislator of the year. And I didn't read these notes that Cecile did, so I missed a whole bunch of stuff, so I'm going to actually read the notes that Cecile prepared up. George Miller is the senior Democrat on the House Education Workforce Committee, which at that time he chaired because we had the Democrats in there, and it was the Labor Committee, not what the Republicans choose to name it. George is from my hometown. He was first elected in 1979. He was 15 then, I think, or something like that, George, and he represents the newly created 11th District, which is East Bay of San Francisco, including the majority of Contra Costa County, which is where I'm officed. George's top priorities in Congress involve education, economic growth. I want to just talk about a few of his legislations, which Cecile's been kind enough here, so I wouldn't forget him to highlight. The first major piece of legislation President Obama signed into law on January 29th of 2009 was the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, a bill that George co-authored and moved through the House. This was huge. Where it's a kind of a strange concept where women actually get paid, the same as men. And because we had the House, because we controlled the politics with our president and with a democratically controlled House, and Senate, we were able to move those things forward, and that was thanks to George. In response to the worst recession since the Great Depression, George helped craft President Obama's American Recovery and Reinvestment Act to save and create millions of jobs and investigate again back into education and move the economy forward. 2007, George sponsored the Fair Minimum Wage Act, which was finally passed as an amendment to an appropriations bill, and the minimum wage increased over 2 years from $5.15 to $7.25 an hour, where it has unfortunately remained since 2009, but George is continuing to introduce and try to move a real living wage forward for working families. In 2007 and 2009, as the author and lead congressional sponsor of the Employee Free Choice Act, George has steadfastly championed the labor movement with his legislation, to help us. And as we know, when you help labor, you help all working families. Again, it's no surprise that George, we presented him the Legislator of the Year award in 2008. We could present it to him every year. If we had more people like the Honorable Congressman George Miller in Congress, we wouldn't have to even be having these meetings here. So from my hometown, from the county where I'm office, from the great state of California, I'd like to introduce the Honorable Congressman George Miller and a great personal friend.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Tom, thank you so very much, not only for the introduction, but for your friendship and your counsel. Sometimes it's a bit of a pain in the ass, but most of the time we're on the same page. When we're done talking, we get on the same page, but he's just been invaluable to me in terms of supporting working men and women, union organizations, people's rights at work. You guys have been in the forefront of that. And certainly in our area, we've had great success because of our unity across the labor movement and across those of us who are fortunate enough to be elected to public office. And we consider it a real relationship. We consider it one where we both benefit. And I'm very excited to see you here today because of your dedication, because of the work that you do on behalf of working people, and recognizing the very difficult environment that we have here in the Congress of the United States. But you're here to put steel into us, and you're here to take a message back home to the people you represent, just how difficult this atmosphere is. I've been here almost 40 years. It'll be 40 years next year. And I've never worked in an environment like we have now in Washington, D.C. There is no interest on behalf of the Republican Party in this town, in the House of Representatives, of doing much of anything to help working people. Well, certainly not anything in favor of organized labor, and nothing on jobs to get our economy moving. What they want to do, as you know, with sequestration, others have talked to you about this, is just grind down the federal government. They don't believe that the federal government adds any value. And therefore, if you get rid of it, nothing happens because it's not worth anything. Well, as we're finding out, people are being taken out of cancer treatments because the money's not there to pay for that. Poor kids are losing Head Start. They're losing school lunches. They're going to start losing classroom teachers in our state probably in the next couple of months. This has ramifications. And what is it doing? It's killing jobs, not creating jobs. It's killing jobs. And what's the number one complaint of small businesses in this country? There's not enough customers on Main Street because there's not enough people working. They keep saying if you cut the deficit, somehow you will grow the economy. What we see is if you don't create the jobs, the deficit just continues to get worse. We now see that the deficit, a lot of stories yesterday about the deficit's going to be much smaller, so the battle over the debt limit's going to be later. The deficit is smaller because we're starting to get some upbeat work in the employment sector. You can't cut your way to a balanced budget. You got to grow the economy. You got to put people to work. You got to create the jobs. And the idea that these jobs will just come forth without the federal government. Well, who's going to build those highways without the federal government? Who's going to build the modern grid without the federal government? Who's going to revitalize the power industry in this country without the federal government? Who's going to modernize the ports for the new ships that are already being built where our ports are too small so we can engage in world trade without the federal government? It's the Corps of Engineers that dredges that. Okay? So what are we talking about here? They're talking about la-la land. But as they preach this, people continue to not have the job opportunities and the economic opportunities that they deserve. I've tried to talk to them. I've gone to them and said, do you want to work? Do you want to work to lower the cost of college, to strengthen our schools, to invest in energy, to protect people's right to vote? See this eye? Slam the door right in my face. I don't want to talk about any of this. Well, screw them. Why I like coming and talking to you and to your brothers and sisters in organized labor is, to me, in my mind, you bring an urgency to these issues because you're on the front line. Unfortunately, you're on the front line because there's an effort to get rid of the American labor movement on the Republican side of the aisle and in the corporate world. And it's a constant campaign. I live every day, the members of my committee live every day with that constant campaign to weaken labor. But you're the guardians of that effort. You're the guardians to resist that, because we know what happens to labor happens in spades to unorganized workplaces, happens in spades to families that don't have organization, somebody to speak up for them. And so you're in those front lines. And that's why you have to, when you visit your members of Congress, as you have over the last couple of days, when you see them back home, you've got to put steel in their spine that this isn't an accident what's happening. It's not an accident that we see corporate profits at record high, that we see the accumulation of wealth, unlike anything we've seen in this country in the past. The vision, you hear it, you know, it's now 350 times the average wage is what the CEO gets. the accumulation of assets shifting to the top 1%, the top 1/10 of 1% of the top 1%. That's not an accident, that's a plan. And as you know, wages are stagnant, benefits are stagnant for working families all over this country. And if you're not organized, it's much worse. So those people who kind of dance around about the union movement, they better understand you're the breakwater here for the storm that they've been going through. And as bad as it is, it would be much worse without you. And we've got to get that message out across this country. Working families in this country are simply under assault by the corporate world and by the right wing of the Republican Party, which is almost the whole Republican Party in the House of Representatives. And they're pushing a system that is rigged. It's just flat out. You're all sophisticated. You know when a game's rigged. You know when you don't want to get into a game. The banks create the worst financial scandals since the 1930s. And then when people try to refinance their houses, the banks lie to them. They lose their documents 12, 13, 14 times. This isn't a rumor. This is what my congressional office deals with. And people are deeper and deeper in debt, and they say, oh, you're too deep in debt, we can't help you. Then they cut a deal with the attorney generals of the state and the attorney general of the United States, and they sign a deal, and they lie to the people again. They start the same process over as people are struggling to hold on to their assets, to hold on to their home where they're raising their family. They lie to them again. God bless the Attorney General of the state of New York that took him into court on Monday for lying again after they signed an agreement not to do it. Wells Fargo, Bank of America. They're destroying families. Black and Hispanic families lost 70% of their wealth in this downturn because of the financial scandals on Wall Street, mainly their homes, the equity in their homes. You all know, friends, and you may have suffered it yourself, the loss of equity in your home. That was because of a scandal, and nobody's going to jail. It's got to be rigged. Because the former Secretary of Treasury was worried about destabilizing the banks. This would make it rough on the management of the banks. Rough on the management of the banks, try being an American citizen. That's why you're here. Because you're organized. You've got protections. And you've got to speak up. And you've got to speak up to us too. Because this place is getting overrun with special interest and money. And if you think it's rigged just for the homeowner, that's just the homeowner. That's just the average guy out there. In my district, in the Bay Area of California, in Las Vegas, in Florida, in Arizona, that's just a person. Try what's going on inside the union movement. Try what's going on with the National Labor Relations Board. And look at the constant effort that they've tried to do to destroy the board, and essentially for the moment they have destroyed the board. The board cannot take any enforcement actions because the minute it's appealed, the board's not properly organized according to one court decision. So they've stalled that out. But if you went to them, they want to challenge your bargaining. They would say the employer has the right to pick the bargaining unit. So Boilermakers have to organize with cafeteria workers and security guards and maybe a few office people. That's your bargaining unit. Win that election. No, you get to pick the bargaining union. But they're so upset that that's what the National Labor Relations Board, they want to shut it down. After they took a tough strike by the machinists at Boeing, they took a tough strike. Machinists won that strike. The chairman of the board had mouth off. And he says, we're never again going to suffer that strike because we're going to send this work away from Boeing, and they send it to South Carolina and elsewhere in the world. What he didn't know, because he didn't read the law, you don't get to do that. You don't get to retaliate for workers enforcing the rights that they have under the law. You don't get to retaliate. And it worked out. Members of my committee stuck tough. I don't know how many hearings we had on the National Labor Relations Board, but our members were there every day asking the questions, supporting the effort against what they were doing. And at the end of the day, the machinists got a new contract. They got new work, and they got their benefits, and they got their retirement, and they got their health care because we stuck tough, and we don't let them do that. Now they're retaliating against the board again, whether it's your bargaining unit, and now there's no enforcement. So understand what's taking place there. If you're fortunate enough to be in the workplace, Tom Bach and I were just talking, Chevron refinery in my district blows up. Fortunately, nobody was killed, because a firefighter was properly trained, smart enough, got into his suit. He was trapped in his rig. The rig was on fire, so nobody was killed. 14,000 people went to the hospital from poor neighborhoods because of the explosion, because of what it did to the air quality, and because of asthma in our children and older people. The pipe that leaked and exploded was supposed to be replaced in 2002 because that's what Chevron's metallurgists told them to do. I think this is 2012-13 when this explosion happened. They chose not to replace that pipe. They chose to put the community at risk. They chose to put their workers at risk. But they have no fear. They have no fear. There's 13 people who inspect all the refineries and chemical plants in the state of California, no budget. They get around to you once every 100 years. Texas explosion, last time OSHA was there was 1985. 1985. Ammonia nitrate. You're supposed to tell people if you have over like 200 pounds of it around, because that's what blew up Oklahoma City. 200,000 pounds. And nobody knew it because nobody was paying attention. Self-certification. Oh, the employers will take care of it. They're still certified. OSHA, keep cutting their budget. They can get around to your plant, I think, once every 175 years. That's not workplace safety. That's not the protections that people need. But that's the rigging of the system. And today on the floor, they're back at their long-time effort to get rid of overtime. They got a family-friendly policy. They got a policy for moms. They got a policy for women. That if you just agree to work overtime and we don't have to pay you the wages, we'll give you comp time sometime in the future. But if you work 10 hours now today, if you work another, X hours a week, whatever it is, we'll put your money into escrow and then we'll give you comp time later. You don't get to pick when the comp time's there. I get to pick it because I'm the employer. And you don't get your money for a year. So you're making, here's the working stiff, making an interest-free loan to his employer. And he can keep up to 160 hours of overtime. That's like 4 weeks of overtime. What the hell are we talking about here? This is family-friendly? I don't know, when I was young raising my family, I was in the merchant marines, I was sailing on oil tankers, I worked every goddamn hour I could find because I had to support my family. When I worked in the refineries, I worked every hour of overtime I could possibly have because I was supporting my families. That was an important part of my weekly wage, my bi-weekly wage, whatever it was. At the cannery, I worked overtime every hour I could get because I was a young family. I needed that money. I didn't need a promise that someday I might get comp time. And if you don't go along with the gig and you're not organized, they'll fire you. There's no rights. Your employer can be arbitrary. This has got to stop. This is the war on working people in this country, organized or unorganized. But you're our heat shield. You're our heat shield for those families that haven't figured out they'd be much better off if they were organized. The minimum wage. The minimum wage. We're trying to get $10.10 an hour in the next 3 years. Step it up. We still won't be where minimum wages were in 1968. Tipped employees have a $2.40 minimum wage? Hasn't been raised in 20 years. They have to make it up in their tips, but their minimum wage is $2.40. We want to raise that. They're supporting families. And what are cities discovering? What is San Jose looking at? What does San Diego look at? New York's looking at? Seattle? You increase the minimum wage, you have a more vibrant city. You can't build a vibrant city on the backs of poor people. You can build a vibrant city when people can afford to pay their bills, buy something at a small business, provide for their families. That's how you build vibrant areas. And that's what the American labor movement has been all about. And we can show you the record. We said we were going to do health care when we were in control of the House, when the Democrats had the majority in the Senate and the House. We did it. We said we were going to raise the minimum wage. We did it. We said we were going to cut the cost of college, the cost of student loans. We did it. We did it once. We did it twice. We said we'd modernize an energy policy. We passed it in the House. We said we were going to modernize an education policy. We passed it. So we know we can deliver on this. But you got to help us with the American public. You got to, one, continue to be their guardian. But two, this message has got to be explained, that this system is rigged, and it's getting more and more rigged every day by the most powerful, richest people on the face of the earth that we have ever seen. We've ever seen. And the accumulation of wealth goes on and on and on and on. And we've got to understand that, because that's about the families that we represent. That's about your workplace. That's whether or not you're going to have a chance at having project labor agreements, whether you're going to have a chance on some projects of Davis-Bacon wages. You know, that's what it's about. That's the floor under the wages. I mean, we had a hearing. The governor of Ohio, you know, went Republican. We had a hearing on this. The guy came in, and he was an iron worker. And he said, you know, I kind of voted for Kasich for some reasons. I don't know if it's guns, abortion. He didn't want to talk about it. He said, but geez, I didn't know the guy was going to come for my wages. He said, I live and die by a project labor agreement. I didn't know this. I said, what the hell do you think? What do you think he was going to do? He's carrying out an agenda. So, you know, I hate this situation. I've been a very successful legislator my entire career. I hate the fact that we can't get things done in Washington. But you can't give in either on these fundamental principles. You can't give in on the rights of people to organize. You can't give in on the rights of people to have a 40-hour work week. You know, politicians run around and say, boy, you know, the union movement, you brought us the weekend, you brought us the, you know, the 40-hour work week, you brought us vacation days, you brought us health care. You know, and that's what we're fighting over right now, because they want to roll it all back. And the Boilermakers and your brothers and sisters in this movement are what stands between that devastation for working families in this country, or whether or not we change the direction, we change the glide path of higher productivity, yet the worker gets less and less of their productivity. You know how much better trained your workers are today than they were 20 years ago, how much more skilled they are than they were 20 years ago. They're increasing their productivity, but they're not getting in wages and benefits because they've decided they're just not going to share it. They're just not going to share. They're going to take it for themselves. Companies more productive, companies earning more, they'll keep it for themselves, and that's enough. We cannot build a strong society on that. We cannot build a strong economy on that. And we cannot let the political system wander in the visions and embrace the visions of the Tea Party that wants to destroy the basic foundations of prosperity in this country. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here. Thank you just time and time again for what you do. I really appreciate it so very, very much. Thank you, my man.
How about our Congressman George Miller?
Thank you. Thank you. Martinez. Hey. I watch out. We'll get her up here. We'll be wrestling in a minute.
Is this for? Is this for? Here, Bridget. I thought it was for me.
Oh, no, we don't get to know this.
Thank you.
Okay, we're getting ready to do the raffle, so if you want to buy tickets, 6 for $20. And anyone that did not get their picture taken that presented a check maybe when they first registered, please come up and we'll do the photo. Mike, you can stop rolling now. Anyone that presented a check or